Let's move to Botswana this morning with our top stories, where Economist Bogolo Kenewendo, who made the headlines 5 years ago after becoming Botswana's trade minister at 30, making her one of the youngest government ministers in the world. She's now the UN Climate Champion Special Advisor for Africa.
In an interview with the BBC's Focus on Africa podcast, she has spoken about the sexual harassment and discrimination faced by women at the top of politics. Now, looking back at her 19 months in the job, she spoke about how she survived the environment. In her words, when you're a young woman in such a space, there are a lot of innuendos. How you got the job, how, of course, but even those who you work with, are fighting off sexual advances or even harassment in some cases at work. Now, joining us is our correspondent from Botswana, Tebogo Mokoto, to give insight into these conversations. Good morning, Tebogo.
Okay, good morning, Olive. How are you guys doing?
We're fantastic this morning. Great to see you. The conversation on sexual harassment in the workplace is not new. Across Africa, it's a very popular conversation. But of course, it's still shocking to hear it on these levels. So tell us a little bit, about her and how this news basically hits the people in Botswana.
I think obviously when the story broke on the BBC, a lot of people in Botswana were really looking at it closely, because as you'd understand, Osaki, just recently we've had another minister, specially elected member of parliament, Dr. Unity Dao, who decided to say she's going to step back or relinquish her position in the ruling BDP. Speaking of very, very toxic exchanges and a toxic environment to operate within in the structures of the BDP, and you'd understand that Kenewendo was also under the BDP. So for her to come out and level these accusations, or rather these experiences, because they're essentially not accusations, these are things that she has gone through. So for her to level these also now further points us in the direction of paying attention when it comes to what might be happening behind closed doors that we are not necessarily aware of as journalists. So in discussing it, we're really looking to dig further into it, because you understand that even in the podcast, Kenewendo mentioned or speaks to the case, a severe case of sexual harassment or sexual assault, but doesn't necessarily delve into details in terms of who it involves, how it was handled. She says she reported it, and in reporting it, of course, it really helped in terms of the sexual offenders registry that we now have in the country. But she doesn't delve into details as to, is this a prominent figure in the ruling party? Is this one of the other ministers that we should really be looking at in terms of her experience and the harassment that she says she went through? Now, women in politics has also really in the past come out to say, fine, in light of Kenewendo's assertions, the sexual offenders register was implemented, but they're complaining that there's no reporting, there's nobody giving them feedback or even giving media feedback in terms of how the processes of this particular sexual offenders registry is going. Because gender-based violence in Botswana, in addition to rape and sexual assault, they've all spiked very sharply. So a lot of women are really speaking out against this, and Kenewendo coming out to say this has really added much needed traction in terms of really addressing this issue.
And I completely agree with you that Kenewendo speaking about this brings the much needed traction, because someone in her position, with the level of influence and exposure that she has, in a way gives voice to the numerous number of women who may in some way be dealing with sexual harassment but be unable to speak about it. I want to talk about, the culture. Is there anything in some way, and this is a question that several countries around the continent need to answer, Are there areas or are there things in our culture that further perpetuate the culture of sexual harassment or gender-based violence in this regard? Are there things that we probably need to have conversations about, maybe within the family settings, within the workplace settings, that we need to sort of bring to the fore to discourage, sexual harassment in any manner?
I think there is need. I think there is need to discuss culture because we've seen in the past, even I'll keep it to Botswana because obviously this is where maybe I understand a bit more.
All right.
We've seen a culture where women are encouraged to be rather submissive, and it has been that way ever since time immemorial, where
all right.
During marriage is really rather told or set down by elders to say we need you to be more compliant, and they would say, if a man does this, you need to be more lenient. It's been in our culture to really advise the woman to be more submissive and more docile when it comes to situations that deal with men. But now, when you place a woman in the professional space, you are talking about being in the boardroom, being engaged in debate, being engaged in really tense conversations. So I think culture does play into it, looking at African culture and where women have been placed in this particular setting. So there is need to address these cultural practices in order to adjust to the current status quo.
I want to talk about it from the men's perspective also, because when men hear sexual harassment, or hear about these things, sometimes their minds might race all the way to rape or actual physical, touch. And so tell us what the conversations are like in Botswana around men. Do men understand, that there's different levels of sexual harassment, that there are certain things, certain conversations that are wrong to have in the office space or generally to someone who you are not, in a relationship with? Or is it just understood that as long as you do not physically assault and sexually harass a person, then, all is fair?
I think right now, also, if you look at what Kenewendo said, she spoke of innuendos, where somebody would pass suggestive remarks and make such commentary. So I don't think there's enough discussion surrounding these issues to say, it still becomes offensive to especially a professional woman, because now women have a challenge to really assert themselves when it comes to the professional space. So now it becomes offensive if you are going to be making certain comments. I don't think we have enough discussions to really point out that it doesn't really mean that it's an offense once there's physical contact or there's rape and comments as well, snide comments, constant groping and touching somebody inappropriately, even if it's not suggestive, just really respecting a woman's personal space in the professional setup. I don't think these are conversations that we talk about the most or talk about enough, because what has happened in the past few days is that we've seen really heinous acts of this particular nature where it leads to death, where it's really physical rape and it's aggressive in really horrific ways. So we are not addressing the minor issues associated with sexual harassment because we are focused on the bigger aspects of the practice. So I don't think there's enough conversations.
All right. I think on a final note, I would also say in terms of perpetrators, right? Perpetrators of sexual assault. How strong are the laws in Botswana in enforcing punitive measures? Because what we see is that in a number of countries, why people don't want to complain about having been sexually assaulted is because, one, they complain about the difficulty with which it is to prove that this assault actually happened, and two, because they find that the laws are not strengthened to be able to protect the survivors. Rather, we then perpetrate a culture of abuse, a culture of silence, and focusing on the survivor as opposed to putting all the pressure on the abuser. So how would you rate the laws in Botswana in terms of their strength to protect the survivor and to punish the abuser?
I think the laws, Olive, right now, what has been, because of the current state of affairs in terms of gender-based violence in general and sexual assault, the laws are being reviewed. But just as any other country in Africa, I feel like there's still more that needs to be done in terms of really addressing or really punishing the aggressors stringently, because now you'd have somebody in a position of leadership, for example, as is the case currently, where a politician is accused of alleged gender-based violence. You know what I mean? And there's nothing really that now bars them, or the party that this person belongs to has said they're going to stand by the candidate and they're not going to disbar this candidate because they don't want to start a witch hunt. I feel like such instances go to show that the law needs to be really tightened and detailed in terms of how we address and deal with these cases, because now what we've seen is that there's a spike. So now if there's a spike, it goes to say that there's no deterrent, there's no active deterrent currently in terms of perpetrators. So they are not afraid, or they don't have the mental fortitude that is enforced by stringent laws to say, I'm not going to take this course of action. I'm going to restrain myself because of fear of the law. So now, if there's no fear of the law, then that goes to say that the law is not yet at that stage where we can say it's acting as a deterrent, because we are seeing increasing numbers. Kenewendo is one of many, as you'd imagine, Olive, and some of them are, of course, afraid of speaking. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues here, about this particular instance. She works in the corporate world. So she was responding to my status to say, you know what, a lot of women go through this. We're afraid of talking. It's hard to talk because as a woman, currently, I'll tell you about me, I'm not progressing. My career is not where I thought it should. But if I come out and talk about the situations and that I find myself in, the uncomfortable moments that I find myself in with my male counterparts in the office,
right,
it's going to hinder my progress. So no, women are not talking for that particular reason.
Okay, I mean, we can't stop talking about sexual harassment and gender-based violence. We will keep advocating beyond the 16 days of activism at the end of each year. We will keep talking about it, and the more we talk about it, the more we shine the light. Thank you so much, Bogo, for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure, guys. Have a great day.
You as well.